All right, welcome back to Cooking with Doc. We're going to do actually a shepherd's pie today, which is maybe the most complicated thing we've done together. So when I screw it up, don't make too much fun of me. Shepherd's pie is traditionally lamb pie, like lamb with mashed potatoes on top of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of do potatoes and the filling all at the same time, and then we'll get it together. So this is just water over here that I'm adding salt to boil my potatoes in. And I have a piece of lamb here, right? So normally this is done with ground lamb, but this was really cheap at the store. So I bought this and we'll chop it up ourselves. You can also use, like I said, ground lamb or ground beef if you're not a lamb fan. But all of it works. So you notice we got this like big piece of fat on top of the lamb. So we got to take that off. And kind of the best way to do it is you need a very sharp knife. And you just kind of need to get it started. And as you go, you slice and you kind of pull, right? And you don't need to get all the fat off, but like this fat on top is never going to render off. It's just too much of it. So you can kind of go about it this way, which you can't really see from that angle. What I'm doing is I'm slicing a little kind of flap that I can grab onto, and then just slice more of the fat cap off. And that gives us access to the meat underneath. So I'm going to kind of keep doing this while the potato water over there cooks, and we'll get this meal going. So like I said, you can use ground beef, you could use ground lamb, you could use ground pork. All of that works really well. What I'm going to start doing is I'm actually going to use a paper towel here to kind of as like a guard against what I'm cutting. Just a little extra protection. I felt that I almost kind of cut myself before. So I'm just going to use this as a little extra guard while I take the fat off the top of this lamb. For those of you who have never had lamb, it does kind of taste like beef, but it's a little grassier, it's a little earthier, and I don't know, I really like the taste of it. So here we go. So we got a good amount of this fat off. We got a good amount of this fat off, and actually the paper towel actually helps you hold on to it as well. So we got a good amount of that fat. And what we're going to do is we're going to have to chop this up into little pieces because we want little pieces in our shepherd's pie. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to add a little olive oil to our fry pan. And now this fry pan needs to be a pan that can go in the oven because everything's going to be kind of made in here. So I added a little bit of olive oil. I'm just going to throw out my my fat. I'm going to cut this kind of into bite-sized pieces. Right, so we're thinking, I don't know, maybe 1/4-inch cubes or something like that. It's kind of hard to see, but like that's kind of a good size for it. And we'll turn the heat on the pan to like kind of medium heat. This way we can start getting a little color on this. So the way this pie cooks is we kind of get a little saute on the meat on the stovetop, and that adds flavor. After you do that, after you add the flavor that way, we end up braising it in the oven, which means cooking it in liquid, and we're going to cook it in beef stock, which is which is pretty tasty. So my olive oil over here is starting to shimmer. So that means we're going to be pretty soon we can get the meat in the pan. So while that heats up, I'm just going to take a minute to pause and I'll be right back. All right, so I'm back. When I thought I nicked myself before, I actually did nick myself. So I went and just I put a Band-Aid on. I made sure I didn't get any blood in the food so it doesn't, so it's not kind of contaminated and inedible. I'm still just going through slicing up my lamb. So unfortunately, cuts do happen in the kitchen. There are techniques to kind of minimize the chances of getting cut, but you know, if you're not paying close enough attention, it's pretty easy to cut yourself. And unfortunately, making a video while cooking means I'm not paying that much attention to what I'm doing. So I got this meat cubed almost. Now I said 1/4 inch, maybe we're more like 1/2 inch. It doesn't really matter. It's all going to be kind of in the oven, bubbling away for a while. But what's important now is that the oil in this pan needs to be hot, and I can feel that it's hot right now. And we don't want to overcrowd the pan. We really do want to get color on this meat, meaning we want to turn it brown. But we also don't want to, if we have too much meat in the pan, actually all the steam that's created will prevent the meat from browning. It'll actually like boil almost in the steam. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some salt to it. Always salt as you go while you're cooking. And I have one hand here that's been in lamb, and I actually just washed this hand off. So this hand's not been in lamb, so this will be the hand I touched the lamb with. And we'll just go bit by bit and place it in the olive oil. Now you don't have to use olive oil. You can use canola oil. I'd argue probably there's some traditional recipes which use butter, but I had olive oil, so I'm using olive oil. And I'm coming across a couple pieces which are too big, so I'm just kind of cutting them in half when I come across them. Alright, now maybe my oil is a little hot, so I'm going to turn it down a bit. And what I'm doing is I'm actually making sure I put the salt side down in the oil, the side that was salted, for no other reason is that I'm going to add salt to the other side, so I can make sure that it's seasoned nicely on both sides. All right. While this cooks, you notice I haven't put all the meat in the pan. I left there some room in between the meat and the pan, so there's room for it to cook. And they just brown very quickly in the pan. So once you see some browning going on, just flip them. Just flip them. And you'll be in a good spot. Now, like I said, shepherd's pie, traditionally it's ground lamb. We have kind of cubes of lamb today. That'll be good. Other ingredients in it are onions and garlic and peas and carrots, which we'll be adding to this pan as we go. But we're going to let that cook a little bit, and I'm going to get a plate to evacuate it to. So, alright, that's really had enough time to get color on both sides. I'm just going to get this out of the oil. Right, and I'm putting it in a pan with a lip because some juices are going to seep out, and we're going to want those. We're going to want those juices. So we got that, and now I'm just going to add the other lamb to the pan. Kind of do it with the tongs like this. And make my life a little easier. I'll leave my plate over there and I just break this up in the pan. Take this up in the pan and we'll add some more salt. Alright, salt really does bring the flavor out and things. It doesn't just make things salty. And while that cooks, I'm just going to run over here. I'm going to wash my knife off. I'm going to need that again later. So this knife was a gift from Mama Dr. Summers. It's a pretty cool knife, I think. And while that fries, we're going to start peeling some potatoes. So we need potatoes to kind of put on top of the shepherd's pie. I very much like yellow potatoes. They're easier to peel, they're easier to cut, and they're pretty versatile. They make a lot of things pretty tasty. I'm going to go with 3 yellow potatoes today. That we're going to cut into small pieces and put in the water we started boiling before. Let me take a moment and we'll flip this lamb. And we're not quite there on the color yet. So you can peel potatoes with a vegetable peeler. I like to use a paring knife. And you really want to take as little of the skin as you can. But if you're peeling a potato and you see any kind of green underneath, you want to take that as well. So you don't want any green skin on your potato. So we're just going to peel the potatoes. I'm peeling on a paper towel here. You could use like old newspaper. That's what my dad used to use. Just a place to collect the peels as you go, because they're kind of, you got to throw them out anyway, so might as well not make a mess. So we're just going to peel the potato. And there we got one. Right, and sometimes it might look like I'm taking a little more potato than other times. I'm really kind of looking at the kind of flesh that's on this potato and taking off a little more or a little less if I think that's appropriate. If there's any eyes in the potato, like, you know, kind of divots and stuff, that's a little hard to peel around. You know, luckily potatoes are pretty cheap, so even if you're not getting absolutely all the flesh you can on the potato, it's not the world's worst loss of food. So I'm gonna flip my my lamb. Right, and you know, actually, while you're doing this, you might notice there's some like extra fat in the pan that you're cooking in, and that's really is from the lamb. Lamb's a pretty fatty piece of meat, but it is delicious. If you're cooking with ground beef or whatever, you might not notice that. So we flip those, and now we'll peel our last potato. When you peel a potato, what I like to do is I like to take one of the ends and kind of make it flat. So it's like I got a flat edge there, and then go down around the sides and take off bits of the skin as you go. So there's like a weird thing about shepherd's pie, namely that it's called a pie, even though it's not in a pie crust, right? There's no crust on shepherd's pie. It's kind of like a stew with potatoes on top of it. And like traditionally, the word pie just means it's kind of something with a lid on it. So like the potatoes are forming the lid of this dish. So that's why we call it a shepherd's pie. So now that we did that, we're going to cut our potatoes kind of into little pieces. And the smaller you cut these things, the faster they'll cook. So I'm looking at, I don't know, pieces of potato like that big. We don't want them to take that long to cook, mostly because it's going to be the lid to the pie. It doesn't need to be slow cooked. If you like slow cooked mashed potatoes, they do tend to get like a fluffier texture. I don't know the science behind that, but I do know it happens, and that's not what we're looking for though here. We just need this to be cooked because they're going to go in the oven and cook some more and get some kind of color on them that way. So just adding my potatoes to my boiling water. when you add something to boiling water, you might see it come off the boil. It might just kind of not be bubbling anymore, and that's okay. It's because the coldness of the potatoes is bringing the temperature down. It'll come back up to temperature, which is good. So just chopping up my potatoes. And you might notice what I'm doing. It looks a little weird because I got the Band-Aid on, but my knife is connected kind of to the tips of my fingers this way. So it's unlikely that I cut myself again. We did cut myself the first time, which is quite embarrassing, but we'll be okay. It's not like I haven't done anything embarrassing in front of you guys anyway. So here we go. All our potatoes are kind of sliced up. I'm going to add the rest to the boiling water. That was hot. So we got those added. All right, and that'll cook. And I'm going to get the rest of the lamb out of the fry pan. It's got color on it. Okay. Now, once you take the lamb out, there will be some bits of what's known as fond on the bottom of the pan. That's the little brown bits that kind of get stuck and hang around. And there's like actually a ton of flavor in that, so we don't want to remove that from the pan. But I have a little too much fat in my pan to keep going. So I'm going to actually remove some of that, just so there's kind of a nice shallow layer of fat across the bottom of the pan. And I'm going to go in with our onion. So I have one onion here. A good way to take apart an onion is you take apart the stem end and the root end, and then go in half. And it's easy enough to peel from there. And the great thing about this dish is that not everything needs to be like super precise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my onion kind of like, so here's the stem end, here's the root end. I'm going to take my onion kind of this way and just run my knife through like that. Into kind of thin slices so they cook evenly. But it doesn't need to be super precise because this whole thing is going to be kind of hanging out in liquid for a bit. So these will break down. And you notice what I'm doing is when I'm slicing, I'm always slicing either down and forward or down and back, never just straight down. And when you get to the part of the onion where it's kind of not too stable anymore, you kind of turn it on its side, and you can go through the rest of it. And there's our one onion. I'll get my pan back on the heat, and I'll get the onion in the pan. So I took my pan just off the heat a little bit. It was getting a little hot in there. You could kind of hear it because there's some liquid in the pan. You heard it like sizzling kind of violently. So just put my onions in the pan now. They'll also cool down the pan a little bit. I'm breaking them up, and I'm going to add salt and pepper. So here's kind of the crazy thing with shepherd's pie. Potatoes on the whole are pretty flavorless. Like, they need a lot of seasoning to get a good flavor on them. So you almost want your filling to be a little over-seasoned. So I just, I added like more salt and more pepper than I normally would to a thing of onions. It's mostly because I need to over-season this a little bit, because when we put the potato lid on it, those potatoes will kind of suck up a lot of that seasoning. So these onions need to chill out for a bit. They'll give up some moisture as they go. I also need a whole carrot that we need to peel. So I'm going to take either end off the carrot, right? And now again, you could use a peeler. I'm going to use a paring knife. And what I like to do is I kind of like to cut the carrot up into more manageable chunks when I'm peeling it, and then just go about, getting the peel off, and I'm going to grab my my towel, which I had my potato skins in before, and just use that to catch my carrot skins to make the cleanup a little easier. So we're going to peel our carrots. Our potatoes are boiling away. Our onion is getting some heat on it. The onions are softening up. When you add salt to onions, well, when you add salt to anything, it brings the moisture out of the food. And particularly with onions, there's a lot of moisture in there. So it'll actually help them cook more slowly. And rather than getting like kind of brown fry color on them, it'll get more like, they'll soften up first. And that's kind of what we want, because when they soften up, they've given up a lot of their flavor. And that'll make its way into kind of the rest of the dish, rather than just having kind of caramelized onions on their own. So, just peeling my carrot, almost done there. Right, and I'm doing the same thing I did with the potato. Like, if you see some kind of grossness, take a little bit more of the peel than you think you'd need. Until you're kind of happy with the amount, how the carrot looks. So right here I kind of had like a chunk that looked a little gross, so I took a little bit more of that. And what's important is that potatoes, carrots, they kind of grow underground, so like there's gonna be some gross stuff, and that's okay. You just gotta cut it off. So, peeled my potatoes, peeled my carrot. I want my carrot into small chunks, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bigger pieces, I'm going to go in half, and then I'm going to take these halves, go in half again, and then kind of put a small dice on it. I'm going to turn my potatoes down a little bit because that's some of the water is escaping. And we're just going to do small dice on the carrots. We kind of want, you know, a size that like you could put 2 or 3 on a spoon and no one would really mind. And we'll get them in with the onions. So what putting the carrots in as the onions are frying, again, is adding a little more moisture, which is going to kind of allow the mixture, the onions to give off more of their moisture, again, flavor the meat dish a little more. And it's also going to get some color on the carrots, which, again, color is always flavor. Browning, the Maillard reaction as it's known, creates flavor, right? That creates kind of the, like, why a steak is delicious flavor, right? So I'm just getting these carrots in there to get a little color on them as well. This last kind of smaller bit, I'm just going to go in half and then dice instead of into quarters, just because it is a little smaller, so we just kind of want our pieces to be as uniform as possible. Now, we'll give that another toss, and we'll start talking about what happens next. All right, so give that a little toss. In going next is garlic, but that's going to take some time. I want the carrots to get some color on them first. So that's going to take time. I'm going to try to heat up a little bit. But we can peel the garlic, so a good way to peel garlic is, every time I'm cooking I'm using 2 knives. I like my big chef's knife and my little paring knife. I use my little paring knife to take the butts off the garlic, the kind of the root end, right, that part that looks like it was still attached to a plant. Take that little bit off, and if some of the skin comes with it, even better. All right, and then we use the big knife to give it a little smack like that, maybe 2 little smacks, and the skin comes right off, right? So we're not smashing it to a paste, but just putting a little pressure on it, and the skin comes right off the garlic. That's because the compounds that are in the garlic that like make you smell are also the compounds that kind of prevent the skin from sticking. So that'll pop off really nice and easy. I'm gonna taste my, I'm gonna check my potato, see how they're cooking. And we want these kind of really soft, so we can mash them up nice. And they're there, so I'm going to drain these, and then I'm actually going to put them right back in the pot. Why do I do that? Well, what you want is you're actually going to use the heat that's still in the pot to dry the potatoes out a little bit. So there's a lot of starch in potatoes, which we kind of want in our mashed potatoes. What kind of keeps it together. But the moisture prevents it from getting a nice kind of smooth consistency. So I put those potatoes that's hot, are just back in the pan right there. And they'll just kind of hang out to the side until we're ready for them. What I'm also going to add to that pan is all mashed potatoes. Good mashed potatoes have butter. So I'm going to add like 2 tablespoons of butter to it. The rest of it we can add while it cools down a little bit. We want to add the butter now because we need the butter to melt. So, putting some butter in the potatoes. This is definitely not a health food dish. So, you know, don't make too much fun of me for the stuff that's going in there. Now, my carrots are coming along. I have some brown bits in the bottom of the pot, which are starting to get a little extra brown. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to go in with the garlic. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of crush all the cloves, and just run my knife through them kind of roughly. Like, it's not, we don't need a very precise dice on the garlic here. Sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want the garlic just to kind of disappear in what you're doing. But right now I just need it kind of just broken down into pieces. And we'll put those pieces in here. Now garlic burns really quickly, so keep an eye on it. But we'll have that kind of mixed in. And then we're going to add our beef stock. So we'll give that garlic a moment or two to kind of get some color on it. And actually, right, we like kind of like a nice thick kind of gravy on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just a 1/4 cup of flour, right? And I'm going to whisk that in first before I add my stock. The reason you want to add flour to hot fat like this is it'll help cook the flour so you don't get that kind of raw flour flavor. It also will help the grains of flour kind of distribute. So I got a whisk. I'm just kind of stirring this up. And we want to make sure all of the flour, all the white flour is covered in fat, which will make it look kind of and almost creamy. And I got a little stuck on my whisk here. And we give that like a minute to cook just to get the raw flour flavor out before I add, again, cold chicken stock. Now, adding cold stock to this, again, will prevent kind of the clumping, which happens sometimes. And I'm going to add, I don't even know how much, it's kind of by eye. You know, excuse me, this is beef stock. It's got like half a box of stock for a pan this size. And I'm going to go around with my wooden spoon and just kind of scrape the bottom of the pan to get that browning up off the bottom of the pan, that fond. Right now that fond is flavor. We want that up off the bottom of the pan. So, you can kind of feel how much is stuck to the bottom as you go. So that's coming up, and I'm going to add my lamb back in once I don't feel any more fond stuck to the bottom. So I'm going to add my lamb back in along with the juices, because there's a lot of flavor in there. And give this a good stir. Okay, to get it all kind of equally distributed. All right, and now actually the very last thing we need to do is normally there's peas in shepherd's pie, but I don't have any peas. I have green beans. So I'm going to dice the green beans up to maybe like 1/2-inch pieces. And I'm just going to add that instead of my peas. Because, you know, cooking's all about making adjustments when you don't have what you need. So I'm going to add my green beans in here, and that'll kind of be enough. And I'm going to let this boil for a bit before we add the mashed potatoes on top. We still have to make the mashed potatoes. And to that also, I'm going to add some thyme, right? Thyme is a kind of a very earthy, it goes really well with lamb. It goes really well with like a winter roast. So we'll add some thyme to that, and we'll give this a good stir. Now, my sauce has gotten a little thicker than I thought it would right away. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a little more stock to thin it out. Right, so that'll help thin it out. And I'm also going to just turn the heat off. So that flour and fat that we did before, called a roux. Now, normally it's with butter, but we did it with olive oil and lamb fat, and I don't know if that's technically a roux anymore. Right, does like to thicken up over heat, and parts will stick to the bottom of the pan, so you got to give it kind of a nice little stir. Right, give it a nice little stir. And we do want to give it a little taste. Now you might be saying, Doc, there's raw lamb in there, but this liquid is boiling, so the liquid itself is perfectly safe to eat, provided that it's boiling, provided that it's come to a boil. So I tasted it. I think it needs a little more salt, so I'm going to add a little more salt. I'm going to add a little more pepper, because I always think they need more pepper, but I think that's probably about it. And now we make our mashed potatoes. I need a little milk. I'm actually going to use, you can use milk, you can use heavy cream. I'm going to use 1/2 and 1/2, just because it was the thing on top of the shelf. And I'm going to add what I think is enough to make a very smooth mashed potato. Right? And some people use a lot of things. I actually just use a whisk. I go in there and I break it up. Right, I go in there and I break it up. And as the pieces get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, the whisk will actually bring it together. So I'm going to let this just sit for a second. Let everything get a little warm because the dog's barking. I'm going to let Nilla in. And I'll be back to my potatoes, getting this all broken up. You could use a potato masher. You could use a hand blender or a mixer. The only thing with mashed potatoes is I wouldn't use like a food processor or anything like that, because you'll actually make like library paste. They'll beat too much air into it. You'll get a weird emulsion where the texture will be all off. Right? So we want to get this as smooth as we can, and we see it's a lot smoother than it used to be. And we'll give it a taste. Salt's good, but it could use pepper. So I like fresh cracked pepper. I think it actually tastes a lot better. You can use the stuff in a jar if you want. Right? And I'll kind of finish whipping that up. Okay. And now we're finally ready to assemble. I like a, that's still a little hot. I like a silicone spatula for this, kind of one of these bendy spatulas. Allows me to kind of stir around and get everything I need. What you need to do is we're putting potatoes on top of liquid. It likes to sink. So just kind of gently dollop it around your pan. All right, some of those potatoes will sink. That's perfectly okay. We want this covering as much of the liquid as we can. As much of the liquid as we can. And kind of here we go. I'm going to stir this around a little bit, kind of flatten it out. Now, it doesn't cover the whole top. I didn't quite make enough potatoes today, but that's okay. And actually, all we're looking for is to put this in an oven and get some color on top of the potatoes. I know some people add cheese or whatever to the top of their potatoes. I don't. I just want to get a nice little browning on the top of my potatoes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in a 400-degree oven. And I'll just keep checking on it, maybe say after like 20 minutes until it's ready. While that happens, I'm going to clean up this mess, and I'll see you when the finished dish is ready to go. All right, we're back, we're clean, and we are done. So I'm going to take the pie out of the oven. Pan's very hot. Let me use two hands. So while this is in the oven, right, we made that flour and fat mixture, the roux. That'll help thicken up the sauce. Also, the potatoes will help thicken up the sauce. That's around the lamb. And there's our shepherd's pie. No good cooking video is done without some tasting. So I'm going to go with a plate and a spoon. We'll have a little taste. So, some potatoes, some lamb, and just in general, some deliciousness. So, So the sauce is nice and savory. The lamb is nice and tender. It's really good. Very hot as well. But that, my friends, is shepherd's pie. I hope you try it out.